Hello and good afternoon, South Bend Community Elementary. We are here today with Miss Stephanie Bridges, and she's going to be talking to us about ACEs. So, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and we will address your questions if they come in. So, Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Stephanie Stewart Bridges. I am the Director of African American Student and Parent Services. I'm going to share information with you today regarding adverse childhood experiences. The ACES project came to our community through Beacon Health System in 2016 as a part of their community health needs assessment. They were able to determine that the community really needed some additional support with regards to how to address individuals who have experienced trauma. So in May of 2016, they trained a wide array of individuals to be able to provide these awesome community presentations on adverse childhood experiences. So what are ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences? ACEs is a part of a study that was conducted by Kaiser Permanente in the 1990s. It was the largest study of its kind, as there were 17,000 participants. And so this was a partnership between Kaiser Permanente and the CDC. So Dr. Robert Anda was the director of the CDC at the time, and Dr. Vincent Folletti was the individual that was working with Kaiser Permanente. And so they had this idea of, why do individuals who participate in risk behaviors that impact their health continue to do so? And so that was like the foundational question is, if we have an individual who knows that smoking leads to lung disease, why do they continue to smoke? And so these 17,000 participants were able to help make that connection between life experiences, adverse life experiences as children, to physical, mental, and behavioral concerns later in life. So today we're going to talk through some of the things that are associated with the study. We're going to first start with the neuroscience around ACEs. Then we're going to provide you with some data around the study. Then we're going to talk a little bit about resilience. Please keep in mind, the conversation around ACEs is intended to be a cliffhanger. So at the end of the presentation, many of you will want to know, well, what do we do? Well, then I've done my job, because the purpose of the presentation is to deliver information that will have you asking those types of questions and having you kind of creating this space to talk about, how do we address the needs and issues and concerns around individuals who've experienced trauma. So let's talk a little bit about the neuroscience. We all know that the central nervous system is our body's way of responding to the world around us. And we do that through our synaptic connections. So we are all born with every synaptic connection we need at any given time of our life. So we are born with all of those connectors. And so what happens is, at birth, we experience the world based on other people. So as a baby, we are fed, we cry, we're changed, we sleep. And so our connections are really associated to what other people do to us. So when we look at it in terms of becoming, as you grow in elementary age, or the terrible twos, as we would call it, you're experiencing more things. And so your connections begin to grow and gravitate more towards those things you experience the most. And then at puberty, we go through this process called pruning, where we prune away those experiences that we don't need. Because these synaptic connections are very experience driven, as we get older and we mature, those things that we don't need are the ones that are pruned away first. For example, when you are learning to walk as a baby, you sometimes will crawl over to an object, pull yourself up, and then begin to walk. At 12, 13, 14 years old, you don't need those types of synaptic connections to help you make that transition into walking. So that's what the pruning process does for us. It helps us to keep those things that we experience the most. Oftentimes, children who have experienced danger in their childhood, it has an adverse reaction to their synaptic connections. So when you look at a childhood that it has experienced a lot of danger. The way they adapt to change or the world around them is through fight, flight, or freeze, and they can survive in the worst conditions. They don't see the world as a benevolent place. They see the world as a place where they have to continually protect themselves from it. A child who has experienced safety, they look at change through people, process, and possibility. And so they have a sense of safety in recognizing what the world has to offer them. One of the things that we want to make sure that everyone understands is that your ACE score is not who you are as a person. We need everybody's situations for the world to go around. A lot of individuals who have experienced or have a high ACE score, they do well in situations where they have to be hyper vigilant and to look at the world from a different lens. So everybody's experience is important. So what happens when adaptation clashes with expectation? The first place that we really recognize these changes is in the classroom. The expectation is that a student will come in, they will sit down, they will focus, and they will do their work. But when you look at it from the lens of a child who has experienced trauma, has chronic inconsistency, has been abused in some way or fashion, their adaptation to the world around them is centralized around protecting themselves at all times. So you'll wonder, why is a student constantly angry? Or why is it when someone's pencil falls off their desk, they just melt down in tears? Those situations create an opportunity to where their ability to adapt does not look the way as everyone else's. And so they are trying to create an opportunity for safety and to protect themselves. And so when we look at it from that trajectory of those synaptic connections, their connections are more geared towards that fight, flight, or freeze. You also want to remember that these adaptive periods are also shaped by sensitive periods for a child's life. There's research studies that show that small children or male children or boys, small boys, if they're sexually abused at a certain age, that has an impact on their language development skills. If you think about, some of the students in your classroom or the students that you've interacted or engaged with, and you can it kind of raises the question for you, did something happen? And that is the sole purpose of ACES, is to create that opportunity to say, not what did you do, but what happened to you, to have a clear understanding of this cause and effect. When you are thinking in terms of ACEs and these traumatic experiences, you kind of think of it from this term of, if you have constant and consistent stress in your life, your body's response is responding to that all the time. Studies show that your body is really only supposed to withstand 20 minutes of stress at a time. However, children or adults or individuals who experience consistent and persistent stress have this concept of what's called toxic stress. And so this video is going to give you a better idea of the impact of toxic stress on your body.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert, In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
So I know that we're using, I can't see you all and your mics or there's no opportunity for me to directly hear from you, your questions, but I would like to know, what are some of your first thoughts about seeing that video? I think it's important for us to understand that these toxic stress, these opportunities, or these children who come into the building with toxic stress, having a clear understanding of how that's impacting their development. Are there any of you out there that would like to just type something in the chat box just regarding your response to this video? All right, we will move on. The important thing to remember is that although some of these stories sound really grim, we all have a collective choice. There is an opportunity for hope at the end of the tunnel. And once again, your ACE score is not who you are as a person. A lot of individuals they have a high ACE score, but they've gone on and done wonderful things. And so how do we have the idea and create this concept and environment for resilience? And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about once we go through the data associated with the study. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the ACES study. And I'm going to follow up. I see that Melinda mentioned there's a couple of comments that are speaking about the video. So we'll go back to those in just a moment. So one of the unique things about the ACES study was that, one, it had 17,000 participants. And I think the last time Beacon did a community health needs assessment, they had maybe 300 individuals who responded to their study or to their survey. So having that large population of individuals participate in the study was unique in itself. The other piece is that it observed not just one form of adversity, but multiple forms of adversity. Some other unique factors is that most of the individuals who participated in the study were middle-class white people. And so even though that was the population of individuals who completed the survey, a lot of the results were very astounding. So as I mentioned, the study reviewed 3 different types of adversity: household dysfunction, neglect, and abuse. So the household dysfunction questions centered around, did you live with someone who had a substance abuse issue? Were your parents divorced? Did you live with someone who experienced mental illness? Did you observe anyone in your family, a parent, being hit, kicked, or shoved? So substance or domestic abuse or physical abuse. And was anyone in your family incarcerated for any reason? The other section is neglect. Did they experience emotional or physical neglect? And then abuse, emotional, physical, and sexual. And so each of those questions, if you were able to answer yes to any of the statements or responses, that would be considered 1 dose or 1 ACE. And you have the capacity to score up to 10 ACEs. So what information did they collect from the study? They noticed that 33% of the individuals who completed the survey had not experienced any ACEs at all. But 67%, over half of the individuals who completed the survey, had at least 1 or more ACEs. 26% of the individuals who completed the survey had at least 1. 16% had 2. 3 had or 10% had 3, and 16% had 4 or more ACEs. The other thing that they noticed from the study is that the ACEs were interrelated. So 87% of the time, if you had at least one ACE, there was a second ACE that followed it. ACEs have a tendency to have a dose-response relationship. So the higher your ACE score, the more likely you are to experience some type of mental or health issue as an adult. So you can see from this graph that individuals who had greater than 5 ACEs have a 55% chance of developing some type of health issue. They were able to draw correlations between ACEs and lung disease. So if you look at this graph, it shows you that an individual who has an early initiation of smoking has a higher chance of developing some type of lung disorder. And the relation for that is the fact that the more stress you have, smoking is supposed to alleviate that. And so you start smoking at an early age, you continue smoking throughout your life, and then you consequently develop some type of physical result of the smoking. It's not necessarily that the adverse childhood experience causes the lung disease, but it's the risk behaviors associated alleviating the stress or creating that sense of calm that assists in developing that health issue. There's a strong correlation between anxiety and depression related to ACEs and difficulty concentrating. The other thing with ACEs is that they notice that they are intergenerational. So one thing that came out of the study is that individuals that grew up in an alcoholic environment had a tendency of marrying an alcoholic. And so a lot of the risk behaviors associated with alleviating stress are normalized in family environments. When you think about things like something as simple as how you celebrate a holiday, for example, Thanksgiving, if you celebrate Thanksgiving, every year your family gets together, you cook a turkey, you have dinner together, and you may or may not watch football after. It's not that somebody wrote this down for you to do, but it's your community of practice and what you participated in year after year after year. That behavior is normalized. And so that's the same way with different behaviors that aren't necessarily with the best behaviors to participate in. These risk behaviors associated with alcoholism. You know, if you are in an environment where alcoholism is normalized for you, you sometimes don't pick up on the cues associated with other issues that might be prevalent with an individual that you're considering to marry, because all of those things have become normalized. That's why sometimes in the classroom, when you see a kid, we have this assumption that everybody comes from a family environment that has regular routine that creates an opportunity for them to understand, I do this, I complete this first step, I go on to my next step, and then I do this. Sometimes that chronic inconsistency in a family environment contributes to normalized behavior that is not necessarily the best type of adaptive skill to be used in a classroom setting. There's a high correlation between ACEs and depression. Individuals who have 4 or more ACEs have a tendency to experience anxiety and depression at a higher rate. This is just a list of, or an example of, all of the different health concerns that come out of individuals who have high ACE scores. Liver disease, obesity, coronary heart disease, experiencing violence, unintended pregnancies, fetal death, drug abuse and illicit drug use. So all of these things are correlated to the risk behaviors associated with adverse childhood experiences. So what have we learned so far about ACEs through the study conducted by Dr. Anda and Dr. Vincent Valletti? We know that ACEs are common. 16% of all individuals who had completed the study had at least 4 or more ACEs. We know that 67% of the individuals who completed the study have experienced some type of adverse childhood experience. We know that ACEs are highly interrelated. 87% of the individuals who had 1 ACE had a tendency to have 2 or more. And we know that ACEs are intergenerational based on the normalization of risk behaviors associated with alleviating that stress. So this is the oil slick slide, and we call it that because it creates an opportunity for us to understand if we just address the ACEs, how we can have an impact on population issues that have a high rate of experience. So we know that if we address the ACEs associated with alcoholism, we can have a reduction of 65% of those individuals who experience alcoholism. We know that if we address the ACEs associated with cancer, we could possibly have a 24% reduction in those individuals who experience cancer. So we know that if we have or create this opportunity, we can't remove the ACEs. We don't remove the adverse childhood experiences. But if we create patterns of behavior to address the need around the toxic stress and alleviating the concern that comes out of having those experiences, we can have a great rate of addressing the needs of our community. So how do we do that? The power is within each and every one of us. Dr. Anda often speaks of how we create an opportunity to change the language around huge community health concerns. It's how we develop a common language around those things. And we create an opportunity for us to have conversations that will address the need of the population that is impacted the most. And so we do this through this concept called resilience. So I'm going to show you a quick video that will give you an idea of how resilience has an impact.
Why do some people do well despite serious hardships? The science of resilience can help us find answers.
We define resilience as a good outcome in the face of adversity. The extent to which we can build capacities in all children early in their lives to be able to deal with whatever bumps in the road or major obstacles may be coming down the track. That's an investment in building strong human capital and healthy, productive adults.
Some children face more obstacles and adversity than others.
Like having a parent with a major mental illness, growing up in a very socioeconomically disadvantaged community, going to schools that are not good, being exposed to violence in the neighborhood or in the home.
But some children do well despite these significant obstacles.
Resilience is that ability or set of capacities for positive adaptation, allowing you to keep in balance.
We're talking about the kinds of capacities and skills and the abilities that give people a sense of mastery and management of difficulty.
It's tempting to think about children as either having this resilient quality or not. But resilience is built over time, just as and in parallel with how the architecture of the brain is built over time.
It's not just in the person. It's in the interaction between the person and the environment.
So we care about resilience for the same reason that we care about promoting healthy development, because in many respects it is the same. We are interested in promoting resilience in children so that, despite the odds, more and more children can grow up to be productive citizens.
All right. So this concept of resilience is an amazing thing to consider in that it allows us an opportunity to have a clear understanding that, what did I do? I'm sorry. a clear understanding that everybody has the capacity for resilience, right? So it's not a trait that some people have. It is something that everybody has an opportunity to participate in. And so how we create that environment and that dynamic is important. So there are three qualities of individuals who have high adaptive skills. So the opportunity for them to understand their capability, attachment and belonging, and community, culture, and spirituality. Those are the core protective systems of individuals who have a high adaptive nature. So what is this concept of resilience? Resilience is the sum of all of our experiences. And we look at this fulcrum and we can see that we have on one side all of the negative experiences that a child may come into a classroom with. But how we balance those negative experiences with positive outcomes is this idea of resilience. It's creating an opportunity to balance the negative with the positive. Helping individuals understand who and what they are is critical and important. And a lot of times that's done through attachment and belonging. Positive, appropriate relationships are the key factor in building this concept of resilience. We all know that children can adapt to or attach to lots of different things and lots of different people, but it's those positive, consistent relationships that create an opportunity for them to understand the idea of attachment and belonging. Helping students understand their individual capabilities, that idea of self-efficacy, and then how they contribute to the community around them is important. Community, faith, and cultural process is also an incredible protective factor in this idea and concept of building resilience. So how we build community, not just the community that you receive things from, but how you contribute back to that community is also important. An idea of faith and culture is also important as well. So how do we develop this concept of resilience? It's really a community capacity development piece that we all contribute to. So how do we build the capacity to be able to develop this concept of resilience in a school setting is important. You have to have the people at the table who are most impacted by ACEs to be able to have those conversations and to build their leadership skills. So leadership expansion. Coming together with common resources. Everybody has a piece of the puzzle and a piece of the pie. Sharing our learning with one another. So having that experience of what works for me may work for you. How do we make results-oriented decisions is also important. So evaluating those shared learning experiences and determining what works and what doesn't work. And how do we use data to drive the decisions that we make? We want to have an opportunity to lift everyone. So as we know from the data collected from the ACES survey is that ACEs are common. Trauma is common. The whole concept of being trauma-informed is to resist re-traumatization. We first want to recognize or realize that trauma is common. We want to recognize the effects of trauma. And then we want to create an opportunity to where we are not re-traumatizing individuals. We are resisting the opportunity of re-traumatization. And all of this change is up to us. All of us play an important part in this picture of addressing the needs of children who have experienced trauma. And so because it's up to us, our unique culture and capacity in each of our individual buildings plays a role in that. And so has an opportunity to start those conversations of what are the tools we need? What are the traumas our children have experienced? And how can we create interventions to address that need? So to conclude this presentation, We've spoken a little bit about the brain research or the neuroscience around ACEs, that the concept of our synaptic connections is what create this opportunity for us to gravitate towards those things that we experience the most, that our brain's number one priority is to protect ourselves. And so our synaptic connections are related to how we experience those things, how we respond to toxic stress. The ACEs study helped us to understand that ACEs are common, they are interrelated, and they are intergenerational. They're common because 67% of the individuals who completed the study, the initial study, have experienced at least one ACE. Also, they're interrelated because 87% of individuals who have one ACE often have another ACE to coincide with it. And then they're intergenerational by the normalization of risk behaviors associated with alleviating stress. We know that resilience is developed through core protective systems, and those core protective systems are associated with building capabilities or helping students recognize their capability, attachment and belonging, and community, faith, and service. So what do we do next? Next, we have conversations about what does it mean to be trauma-informed? How do we take the information gained from this presentation and work in our individual buildings and classrooms to build environments that will help students develop this concept of resilience? So at this time, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Secondly, if you would like more information on the ACES study, or have an individual building ACES study, I would be happy to provide one of those for you as well. I'm going to look to see, I don't know, Chase, if you can tell me if there are any questions in the chat box.
No questions coming in just yet, but we can wait a little bit.
Okay.
So there, Diane has a comment.
Yep. So I think that's important. A lot of times we might be able to recognize students who have had these experiences or we know of stories, and just to keep that in mind. A lot of times, again, it's kind of changing our language. It's not adding anything new. It's just moving from what did you do to what happened to you. And the more clearly we are able to have that type of a conversation, the more opportunities we have in building resilience in our environments. The ACES survey is not necessarily a survey that is designed for children. Typically, when the survey is provided, you have to be 18 years or older, but we are working on researching a mental health screener that would help us to identify childhood trauma in our students. Are there any other questions? Nope.
Nope. I think we're good to.
Oh, good. Thank you for your time, and thank you for having me. Again, if you would like more information on the ACES study, please feel free to reach out to me.
All right. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So,
bye-bye.
Bye.
Yay. That was weird.